It is. Well, sorry, we're recording, and all the normal things around how we record our meetings is in place. We have a code of conduct, and we can refer to that on the CNCF or the Kubernetes community pages. We have an agenda. I didn't know if we wanted to spend a few, if I should share my screen to do that, would be the easiest.
That would be best, probably, yeah.
All right, let me kind of bring that up. And, it's my first time to use the Zoom as a host, so I apologize in advance for. There we are. There's our meeting notes for today. On our agenda, if you wouldn't mind adding yourself to attendees, that would be great. We have 4 major topics today. Some PRs that John would like us to look at. I'll hand it back to John for that. And then we have the API Snoop roadmap, which we attempted to use some QR OKRs. And I'd love to get some agreeing on scoring for now and look where we tried to go with that. And then if we go through the board, I did that with Aaron, but it might be good just a quick overview of where we are by looking at the board. I'll make sure we do that every conformance meeting. And then there's also a discussion that may run around failure modes for watch-on. We talked about it a bit, but I don't know that we had a super clear consensus. The AIs that we had were where this is okay for this test, but I think it may have changed over the course of the week. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to John. Would you like me to open the links for you? Or would you like to share your screen?
No, okay. I don't want to try sharing my screen on this client. So
all right, we'll go to your first one.
Yeah, 2 PRs. So these are things, Aaron and Jeffrey and I were, Jeffrey's been making progress on the behavior stuff, but it's really different from sort of what's in the CAP. And so we have been, excuse me, going through and trying to do a little, given that the world has, our understanding of things has changed. And so we want to document some of that, document some of the user stories as we see them in order to get a little bit clearer picture of the requirements. And then there'll be an upcoming PR that talks about the solution and how it's changing in response to that from what we have today. So basically just further refinements on this existing CAP and, looking for comments on here. It's still, there's still probably quite a bit more we can do on the user stories, but we're also going to start filling in the changes in the way we're doing. The initial version of the CAP really focused on developers and how we could try to automate some of the generation of behaviors and automate some of the generation of tests from the API spec, but we sort of are de-emphasizing that. We did a little bit of work around that, and it's not as clean as we'd like. It's not as, we have some tooling to help generate behaviors, but it still requires a lot of manual curation. But rather than focusing on that, which doesn't seem to be as fruitful as we'd like, we are simply focusing on some more of the use cases around the tooling, around what the individual, what CI jobs would need from the tooling in order to get what they need, things like that. So that's what this talks about, and please review it. And there's a little bit of discussion in there as well. Happy to go over more of it if people want, but maybe offline people should read it and we should just do it through GitHub.
Thank you, John. Did anybody have any comments?
So what do we view as next steps here? That we collectively agree on, I think we want to get to the point maybe where we don't have any of these unresolved things in here.
Yes.
Want to collectively agree on the use cases. So let's say we've done all of that. What would be the next step after that?
So the next step, and even we can do a little bit in parallel because I think some of the use cases are uncontroversial. The next step will be to take some of our ideas around how to solve those use cases and document them more clearly. So we have some of this sort of in flight, but it's been sort of just done in PRs as opposed to being documented as like here's a plan. So it's to document the plan in the proposed solution section and update that to talk about basically what tooling we need to build um, and how that needs to be utilized in a CI job or something like that. And the other step that's also in progress is another PR out there. Maybe I should have put it in the list too, is to get all the existing tests converted over to the new regime. So that's starting, and um, that's a PR from Jeff Tree at Jeff Tree. I haven't looked at it closely yet though. So anyway, but that's sort of the next step. It's the PR, this cap updated with the specific tooling we're going to build, and then the conversion of those tests and actually building the tooling.
Okay. That makes sense to me.
So if there's nothing else on that, we can go to the next PR. The next PR is we've discussed here in the past, and the CNCF working group as well, this profiles concept. And there's a Google Doc out there somewhere. I think I linked to it in here that describes it. And a couple of meetings ago, we talked about that we really want to move this forward so that we can have things like separate profiles for cluster admins versus ordinary user workloads and ordinary users. So I put down the sort of summary and motivation and goals and non-goals section of this cap to get us started, and would love some eyes on that. Make sure that we're all on the same page, and then we'll start talking about we'll probably break down some use cases for this, similar to what we did before, and then propose a solution for how we're going to capture profiles and how we categorize tests and some of the tasks that need to be done around that. Categorize behavior, but how we create profiles, basically. Thank you.
Right, okay. I added that to the needs review section of the conformance board.
Great.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I suppose I should have done that with both of those long ago. Didn't think that.
Excellent work, John. I'm looking forward to getting my eyes on that and contribute. The next portion is the Q1 OKR scoring. And I've got it kind of set up in two ways. If you click on this first link, it will actually bring up the rendered markdown file. It might be easier to do. And then I think at the end it says, let's merge if we agree on scoring. It may just be the PR itself. This is a PR for API Snoop itself, for us to kind of agree on what it is that we're expecting out of API Snoop and the test writing team. This is how we measure and how we increase our coverage. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. We kind of just look at if I even just zoom in to the top, we don't even have to look at the details too much. For Q1, and I'm saying Q1 is Jan to March, if that's the same as everyone. The score is lower at the moment than I would like it to be. It's 0.2. And that's because our key result metric was getting to 27 new conformance stable endpoints. And that one I will dig into a bit. Our score calculation there is based on actual done merge conformant endpoints. We had had these here, the ones that are marked done, these particular promotions. The needs approval column is likely going to merge, and that's got another 11. Would bring us up to 11, so that would get us to, or another 3 and get us to 11, that would be 0.4. There is stuff that is in, has promotions or just needs to soak for a few weeks, or has some, maybe some flaking stuff that we're removing flakes on. I went ahead and say to add that so you can see that we do have in the pipeline without any major changes to get to a score of 1.0. It's been a lot going on in the world, so we didn't quite get to our 1.0 at the precise end of March. But these list of promotions and stuff that needs 2 weeks, we can look at the board for that later, but here's the specifics on that. We jump down to the KR2 is just another way of writing the percentage increase. So we didn't get to 6%, we're still at 0.3, but that can get to 1.0 if we let stuff soak and wash off the flakes.
When you say coverage there, are you talking about endpoint coverage?
Yeah, this is all, because so far, the stuff that we measure success on and can put OKRs against for test writing is the numerator being the percentage of stable endpoints that have conformance tests that hit them. That is the definition. I know that in the future, when we're ready, we'll have a new denominator. And
then we'll keep both measures. I think they both are meaningful, especially because we yeah, I think they're both meaningful.
We needed to move off of. We had our own Google Cloud account that II was billing CNCF for. And we were asked to move stuff to where we're using Prow for most of our stuff, but we also had EK, Amazon donating, and so I worked hard to try to get everything off of the if you will, the personal Google account into things either at Packet or Amazon or Prow. So our key result 1 was everything being created on Prow. We have some definitions there and they are getting released, but we need to go ahead and cut a release, and I didn't get that done before the end of March. So
so I have, I'm sorry we didn't catch this yesterday. We're going to be making a move with prow.k8s.io to kind of shed any project that is not part of Kubernetes. So if you want to continue to have, because right now, for example, like it's supporting things like TensorFlow and Bazel Build and NetD, right. Google Cloud Platform. None of those are actually part of Kubernetes.
The Kubernetes project proper, yeah.
It's part of the CNCF. And like, so are Helm charts. We don't think it is appropriate for the Kubernetes project to be spending its money on things that are not part of the Kubernetes project. So we need to either talk about conceptually, how would you make API Snoop a subproject and which SIG would inherit it? Or we need to talk about finding some other CI solution for you. I don't have a deadline on when this is going to happen. I'm just giving you a heads up.
Look at donating API Snoop to SIG Arch, which is, I think that's lovely. Or looking at alternative CI. My vote is for this one, but we'll go back. Thank you for bringing that up. Add roadmap. Where's the nice pretty link? Here we go. And we moved everything off of non-Prow. That is because everything else is Prow, and now it's either on Prow or it's on EKS or Packet. and that's a success. We did it. So 0.5. I'd love to get that higher, and I think if we can get that release out, where everything, when we push a tag, that prow creates our images so that we have, you can just go kubectl apply and bring up API Snoop to do test writing and for the site, then we'll have a success there. We don't yet have all the mergy bots, so I kind of have a 0 here for us not doing any manual merging and adopting the Kubernetes bot flow. And I might even, I need to research this a bit, or have maybe even a bit of help. The last bit, so our overall score for that was 0.5. The mentoring and teaching test writing flow contributor summit was another one we wanted to do. We can't get the contributor summit, so it's 0. But I'm pairing weekly with Guinevere and Malian, I think I spelled the name wrong there, to ensure that the workflow, the way that we're writing stuff is accessible. And if they like it, the next few weeks, then we'll bring the mentoring session to others. And in turn, that's who I'm pairing with. And Caleb is directly mentoring Zach and Steven, who are 2 other test writers. And Zach actually does most of the API Snoop GUI work. And Zach and Steven that was one of our goals, to get other people than me teaching test writing. And so Zach and Steven are teaching test writing to Rian, who is our newest test writer, who comes from South Africa and sold his house, sold his car, and then lockdown happened. And so he's started this week. And I think Rian may be on the call. And I'm glad you're here. So I think we got a 0.5 out of those. This is important for me to put our OKRs public, so that everybody can agree on what it is that we're doing and that we're measuring it correctly. And so if we're okay with that, I'd like to merge that. But at the same time, understanding that for April and June, for Q2, April through June, I'd like to see this happen, and suggesting these are our key objectives, or our objectives, to increase stable velocity. So assuming that we got 26, I'd like to get us to 40 new conformant endpoints over in Q2. And instead of doing a 6% increase, I want to do a 9% increase. And it's so close to 50, it's a stretch. I would be so happy if we could actually get 50. But I'm going to definitely put KR, that the 50% is a stretch. One thing we need to do is actually do the gating on test E to E. And then that's part of that is the document in the conformance caps that John just put in. And I'm not going to fill in the details there, but that's definitely our goal. Maybe I can revisit that at another meeting. And I know that I'd like to, before we even get that far, focused on gating the CNCF CATES conformance for any PRs touching these versions, if we're getting this release, because we have, we'd love to have some automation that says this is the list of tests that are required to pass for this release, and we make sure that their logs include them all. Any comments or thoughts on this?
One thing, so when you start talking about it sounded like you were talking about specifically let's see, case conformance. Yeah. So that last one, one of the user stories or use cases for the behaviors cap that we put in was for the CNCF conformance program. And we want to make sure that what we do meets the needs. So if you can review that. And what I'd really like to see there is that the logs contain enough machine readable information about what tests have been run and whether they succeeded, that then we can map that back to the list of behaviors and show that it's successfully, because one of the things is what you said, that we want to make sure all the tests were run. Well, if we know which tests were run, we map that back to how those tests map back to the behaviors, we can show that all the behaviors were covered. So that's kind of, successfully. So rather than checking that all the tests are run, what I'd like to do in that tooling, in that cap, is make sure all the behaviors are covered. That leaves open the possibility, we're not sure we need it yet, but it leaves open the possibility that when we get to profiles and there's optional functionality, that and some of those tests for optional functionality may be implemented differently in different providers, they can still cover the same behaviors. We're not sure we need that yet. We'd like to avoid it, but it may be necessary in some cases.
I guess I agree with that, though for what it's worth, my perspective is I would view this more as a rescoping of your work on gating based on endpoint coverage. I think we would maybe prefer to see gating based on behavior coverage. But that does kind of depend on whether or not we can like lock in place an authoritative list of behaviors, as opposed to a situation where, you know, the number of behaviors continually increases over time and coverage goes down as a result, right? We want to kind of lock that denominator in place.
Yeah, so that's a different topic actually. So that's about changes to Kubernetes and added tests and added functionality of behaviors. What we're talking about here is the evaluation of a given vendor's run of conformance tests for whether they've actually succeeded in being conformant. Totally different jobs.
I guess maybe I'm being too trustworthy, but I do kind of view like if we can get the list of tests that they ran, that should be sufficient to demonstrate that they actually ran the conformance suite of tests.
Yes, but what I'm saying, and that's how we've done it today. But what I'm saying is that we can take that list of tests,
right,
and we can map that back to the behaviors, so that if we do, as we move forward with profiles, and as we move forward with optional functionality, they won't always be running all the tests. And this way we can make sure that the tests they do run cover a complete profile, which is defined in terms of behaviors. Also, when they run all those tests, we can also, there may be cases like take Ingress, for example, where the core API is the same, but there may be some differences in annotations you use between vendors to accomplish the same behavior. And so there may be two different tests. I mean, it gets a little fuzzy because it's not fully portable then, but with two different tests which cover the same behavior in that case, in which case it becomes complicated to track that they ran all the tests they needed to run without doing that join back to the behaviors.
Okay.
I'd say it's without including the behavior hits in the results.
Yeah, we don't.
We won't know.
Right. So we could either do it at the time the test runs. It could be, there could be some tooling built into this Soundbuoy or whatever they run, or they could just deliver us the logs that contain the list of files, the list of tests they ran and the results, and then we can do the join during the evaluation process. So that's kind of two different solutions to that problem. When we go look at the use case, to me, the use case for the CNCF conformance program is I need to make sure that all the behaviors, speaking in terms of behaviors, that all the behaviors that belong to this profile were tested and those tests ran successfully. Now, how I actually evaluate that, well, what are my inputs? My inputs are going to be the tests that were run, whether they were successful. That's the basic input I need. And then I need an input of how the test map to behaviors, but we already have that. That's part of our repo. So in order to make that draw, to make that calculation.
Where are the test behaviors part of the repo that map to the test to behavior mapping?
Yeah, that's what we're working on, right? We're building that in
That's
now.
that PR you're referencing earlier in the agenda, convert existing tests over to the new regime, is an example of how we're trying to link behaviors to tests. So currently, the proposal is we enumerate the behaviors in the YAML file. We need your help in exercising this and working through it to see if that's the mechanism that makes the most sense. So going back up to your API endpoint coverage, I want to trust but verify that. So I know you've been including the number of endpoints that you think you're adding to the title of the PRs, but
Yeah.
what I don't think I'm seeing is runs of API Snoop sort of before and after that show us that. And like it's cool if you do it like at the end of the quarter or whatever to show that in aggregate you bumped up 27 endpoints. But I see lines going up and to the right. Can we count that to confirm?
Sure. If I click on it, this tells us the exact suite that ran. I don't have it per PR yet, but I'm hoping that I can actually take the PRs we're interested in and show the results on this line. And because they're past 118, they should actually show up as a blip on here. I don't have that yet.
But I think like, so for example, could you show us what's the difference between the 117 dot and the 119 dot?
Sure.
For the green line.
For the green line.
Right.
Yeah. So this one,
38.
I think if you mouse over it, you can kind of see. So this was,
right.
What does it say? So tested conformance was 165.
Okay.
At 117. And if we go over here, conformance 165. What is it? Is it 119? 438. It's 165. Because I definitely see that the percentage has gone up. Let me get back to you.
Yeah,
Okay.
something's wrong there because it, the percentage is up in the graph, not below.
And the reason I bring that up is because, and we can get into more in depth about the PR review itself, but there was one PR that was talking about the fact that we are patching the scale and status sub-resources of replication controller is kind of racy, right? And we're seeing some flaky, some conflicts there. And so like one workaround is to just not bother patching those things. But if we don't patch those things, then we're not covering those endpoints. And so the number of endpoints that that PR would cover needs to be, changed.
Right. So we have the endpoints we want to test, endpoints that.
I think a number of those PRs coming out now are specifically trying to close the gap and show the coverage of patching status, because it's not something an end user typically does, but it is something that controllers do and expect to behave properly. The issue is finding something that we can patch that we're not going to fight with the controller over, which like patching the number of ready replicas is definitely something we're going to fight with a controller over. I don't know if in all the statuses there is something that we're not going to fight with the controller over, but status is also, we might be able to just add crap to it. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So if we want to dive into the specifics on that PR, right? I found prior art in some of the pod disruption budget tests that do attempt to retry on conflict. So I'd like to see us do that and see if that actually works.
Yeah, that's the normal behavior for our optimistic concurrency, is like you see a conflict, you just retry.
There aren't that many tests that actually do that.
Right, the tests don't do it, the controllers do it. Right.
So I know it's one thing to like describe it really easily, but I don't think that Hippie or anybody else really knew how to do that.
Right. Sure, no, well, that's fine.
And the examples that we need to look for in the pod disruption budget.
I linked the snippet in the PR.
In the PR, yeah, I remember seeing that. That's a lot of feedback. Thank you. And outside of the gate, making sure the gate looks good, and has the list of behaviors there. This is kind of like this first section here. The mapping of behaviors is here. I'm just trying to make sure I've covered the things. Are these numbers okay as far as, because I know that if we go back to our roadmap here, that these calculations that we put the number there, it's based on the ticket. So like if we go, and we'll go to the board next anyway, but if you look at the board, when we look at our stuff, it's our tickets. I'll make this wider because it's a lot there. When we have a issue that is like this one here for promote core endpoints point, we have the issue and we have the create the test and the endpoints. So you can see like this doesn't quite match up. I need to know whether it's a 4 or a 5 or a 4. And so I'm probably just, Caleb may have had a typo there. But this is where we define it by running this mock test down here, but I don't think we go back currently and run it after the test is written to make sure that we're actually getting an increase of actually 4 points. So that other one probably needs to be changed to 4, but we can verify it. And we should look at the PR itself for the promotion. I think to actually get that final number. Is that? I think that's what you were asking for, Aaron, right?
Yeah. Again, I mean, yeah, like I said, you're making an estimate up front. You just need to verify it, and it's totally up to you when you want to do that verification and how frequently.
Ideally, it's part of the gate that we go back and comment on a ticket that says you're adding this number of coverage, and if it's a negative, we block. Specifically, here's the list, so it's really clear in the PR from the bot. Given that, I wanted to go ahead and kind of close out the roadmap portion. The numbers are based on the issues, and we're low. But if we go through these other steps, we would have eventually gotten to our 1%. So 1.0.
Things are just slightly out of date here, but I'm also curious about that needs 2 weeks thing, because you have the numbers 16 in there, and I'm looking at the needs 2 weeks column right now. Yeah. There's a 1 + 5 and 1 + 4. So
I'll go down to the needs 2 weeks. So these are the ones that were I thought were, here's the 3, right, that equal to 16.
Well, that +7, I think we actually merged, but it's flaky.
It's flaky.
Yeah, and so it needs 2 weeks plus no flakes. So I'm putting in here stuff that's flaking currently.
Okay, sure.
But it doesn't need like a rewrite or a full thing. I think it's just minor concerns. And so my hope is that these
talking about the fighting over the status with the controller. So
yeah.
The retry might fix it. I thought there was a PR. Oh, there is. It says PR there addressing it. What is that one?
Sure.
How does it address it?
Yeah, part of this is going to the board, and we can come back and address it. But this one, I think there was 19 hours ago. Here's the choices, and this was what Aaron just mentioned. He had commented on.
So whatever.
Yeah, what I meant by that was use the status patch, but patch some field that the controller is not messing with regularly. Not patch status. Right. So like ready is the number of ready replicas is sort of like the raison d'etre of replication controller status. Like it's the thing.
Yeah. But it's one of the endpoints that's exposed via the API and needs to.
But
work.
Right. The endpoint though is patching the status. There's not an endpoint for every single field in the status. That's my point.
Correct.
Another field we can tweak.
I see.
That it's not going to change on us. I mean, you still have to deal with the optimistic concurrency, regardless of what field you're changing. So maybe maybe it's an
Okay.
irrelevant point, except that if you're expecting to patch it and then read it and see the value, that's not necessarily going to happen if you're fighting with the controller. Well, and it's something that the controller really reconciles actively.
Gotcha.
And it may be that every single field is that way, in which case we have another option, which is, well, the optimistic concurrency and dealing with that and not worrying so much about what we read out of it if the version's bumped. And two is status. I'm not sure, but status may be fungible enough that we can actually add something to status that's not defined in the Go types. But I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's a
Once
new one
we
for me.
figure this out, would it be possible to have documents on it so then we can refer to this?
Pardon?
Once we figure out what the best way to do it is, then yeah, we should definitely document that.
Sounds good to me.
I think probably the most expedient thing we can do would be to deal with the optimistic concurrency, like you're suggesting, the prior art and pod disruption budget. And you probably can't expect your rights to survive for very long. So don't expect to be able to just read it right afterward and have it say the same thing you wrote.
The running of the original test locally worked fine, and I totally get that running in Prowl gives it different results. But what I have noticed is that if we don't get the, in this case, the replication controller status from a separate request, if we just get from what it returns, it's probably okay. But I would also like to make sure that what I'm saying is correct through running through the tests on here. But it seems to have completed for this PR.
I think that's, yeah, I'm not sure the exact mechanics of it, the API server there, but that's probably true. And I think you were watching, so you should see your event. Generally, you should see your event come through the watch. It's possible that it could compact or whatever, but so I mean, this is a race condition, so it can be like that's what makes it flaky, is that it can work 99.9% of the time and then just flake out, but it loses the race. So.
So I don't want to totally disrupt your flow, Hippie, but I feel like while we're here, maybe it's a good time to answer the other question I had about this PR.
Go back to it. Scroll up.
Keep going. That, but it's probably helpful to see in the context of the code. So essentially,
We're in this PR.
yes.
Scroll down. Your first, you got an assign yesterday.
Yeah, that thing, but I don't know if that's going to be super, if that number of lines of code is going to be sufficient for John to understand what I'm asking, but let me try asking. So maybe it's me, but this PR seems to add a whole bunch of watches, and it's not clear to me, or it's like looking for a whole bunch of watch events, and it's not clear to me what that's doing, like how that's helpful. But this last watch right here is the very last thing in the test, and it's watching for a deleted event. Number one, it's not clear to me whether we're guaranteed to see that deleted event. And number two, I started thinking about, well, what if the watch times out before we get here? Will this test pass or fail? And it sounds like what Caleb was saying, this pattern shows up in a number of tests where it's like, if the test doesn't make it all the way through before the watch fails, does the test fail? And it sounds like it passes.
It should fail, but I don't, that's about how the framework works, because the test, the watch has a timeout. That's that we are debating 60 versus 180 seconds, right? So
Right.
180 seconds, But I don't know for sure. My expectation is that if the watch fails, you're going to get, you're going to,
Do you like panic when you read the channel or something?
No. So if the watch fails, you're either going to get closed, which would be like a normal disconnection or disruption, or you're going to get an error event back from the channel. So in general, I think like maybe we didn't clarify this last time. Anything that's watching the events come off the channel has to be inside a loop that reopens the watch if it gets closed at the last resource version that we got. And in any normal test scenario that I can possibly imagine, you will still get delete events. When you don't get events, delete events or edit events, it doesn't matter. What won't happen would be if you get delayed for like 5 minutes during a test, and then like your process hangs, and then you retry. Yes, the events may not be available. That means that something like your VM got paused for 5 minutes is not really a valid test case scenario. Like we don't pause the test processes for 5 minutes and then verify that they work. So all watches have to be inside some loop, which says like the for loop on the outside is like open the watch at the resource version. Every time you get an event off the channel, update the resource version. If the watch closes, you got to go back to your outer for loop, reopen it, and keep testing. That's kind of tricky to write, which is generally another reason why it's discouraged. Doesn't mean that the test or the process is wrong, but another way to do it would be like you define your end state or what you're waiting for, and you do that for loop where you just take all the events off the channel, put them in an array, and then validate the array. That's probably what I would recommend for the vast majority of people who actually can benefit from testing like this. Is you just want to get events for X minutes off this until you reach a final condition. And we kind of alluded to that last time, but we didn't really draw it out in code.
Okay.
okay.
I think that kind of clarifies it for me, because I just feel like I've seen this pattern of like setting up a watch and then reading from it in a for loop, but it's not very resilient.
Yeah.
And to me, it looks like it's going to introduce additional flakes. But I feel
So-
like the pattern right before we copy.
So the alternative then is what is polling, but then
No, I would probably say what we should do is there should be a test helper that says create a watch for a resource version, and then get all the events off it until you hit any of these conditions cause it to exit, and then return an array or an error. If you get an error, the test fails, which would mean like something weird went on. And then if you get the array, you go through the array the same way that a for loop would be going through the channel, but instead of dealing with like the reconnection logic, there's something that helps you.
yes.
I can certainly help frame that for someone, and we can put some comments on that, and I can help like get to the point where we have a little helper like that for most of the cases that this kind of test would use.
I think that would be great, seeming as a lot of these tests are relatively generic. They're all structured very similarly, so I'm totally for that.
Awesome.
Yeah, that would be super helpful, Clayton. I really appreciate that.
And the only reason this doesn't exist is because the people who went and did the first round of this were very opinionated and didn't like when people do this, which is basically saying they don't like a behavior of Kubernetes. And so they were a little too zealous in their, you shouldn't use this because it'll hurt you. I think we missed an opportunity to say, well, let's add a third method, which shows you how to use watch events in a way that you can use it to see a timeline of changes as the server sees it. We need to go do that anyway for some other tests where we've broken that and nobody had a test that verified the order of events because the informers hit it, which was the flip side of the we're too clever for our own good.
Yeah, I think it's been a long time since a lot of the tests in E2E were originally written. And so maybe they reflect best practices of those days and not necessarily current best practices. It's difficult. I bounce around enough that I don't have time to go deep into API machinery stuff to understand like what the best way of doing things is today. So that would be really helpful. Because the problem I have right now is I can like eyeball the test and say, well, I think it looks okay. And then, we let it merge and then we just empirically verify whether it flakes, which I can do. That just takes a lot longer for stuff to come out in the wash.
Yay. Clear action and help from Clayton.
Yep, just hit me up maybe tomorrow, and I will. I'll work someone through this. We have other tests in API machinery that should be doing this to validate core logic to prevent those regressions, and so I'll go guilt trip those other people too.
Let's see.
Cool. I think that answered, because that's a question I have around almost any PR that has a hold on it right now. And Clayton and John, since you're here, there are 2 more PRs in the needs approval column, which need approval, and an LGTM at some point.
I think one of them, Clayton, was one you had an objection to. I wanted to make sure you were the one to.
I'm going to pull these 2 up.
That's the needs 2 week things. That's not it.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
I did hit needs. My bad. My bad.
Yeah, which for what it's worth, like when I was running through these with Hippie yesterday, I made a column to say we'll put these here because they're blocked on needing 2 weeks worth of data. So like here.
No.
That and that.
Avoid.
No, that's okay. Remote scheduler preemption.
Is this the one that was poor performing?
Yeah, it's the one you had an objection to early on, and we worked through getting something that fixes that.
We did fix it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, did I approve this already? Maybe I already poked it. I thought I poked one of them that said preemption. Maybe I was wrong.
You approved the pod template lifecycle, it looks like.
Fair.
Let's start over again. Make sure I'm grabbing the right ones.
I know promotion is not flaky right now as I've seen it. So I think I reviewed it. Wait, isn't it in done? Preemption. Oh, sorry. That was preemption, not.
Yeah. Like I know I went and pinged you for the PR that was fixing it up. Now I'm just trying to get back to the pattern of like, I don't want to keep piecemeal pinging you guys on PRs for approval. I want to make sure we load up the column with stuff that needs approval and you can sweep through it when you're ready.
Yeah, this is the first week that I haven't gone before the meeting and then just looked at whichever ones. Yeah, I think the scheduler preemption, the test is fine. So I think this is a good one once it gets to look good to me from somebody who's looked at it, which I think is, it doesn't have look good to me on it, right?
I guess I can go ask whoever put LGTM on it the last time.
Yeah, I think it's been a very long time since it got look good to me.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, if you tag it, I'll bag it.
Shop for an LGTM. Go back into that column.
Yeah, I'll look at this session if anyone. I'm looking at it right now. So you're saying that's not flaky anymore, huh?
Yes.
That was where we were stuck with that one.
Yeah. The resource requirements were dramatically reduced and it doesn't blow up the node it's on anymore. It works on small clusters.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, the other PR that's sitting in the needs approval column that is approved was one about, there were some, I don't know how many months it's been, I discovered that there were some conformance tests that relied on the kubelets API in order to pass. We decided that was a bad idea. We, changed our policies to say nothing should use that. So I went through and modified the existing conformance tests that break that rule to stop doing that. So as of V119, we finally obey
And
that.
these have all merged because I know there was at least one where they wanted to split and create 2 tests. Maybe that was a newer test where they were looking at the kubelet API. Thinking of it, there were some where I think they still wanted to do those tests as regular end-to-end tests,
Right.
as conformance, and they had intended to. This is in Node. They had intended to, I think, create a separate test for conformance, but I don't know if that happened.
If you can dig that up, that would be helpful. I pinged Yuju for the node test. That was about pods being submitted and terminated gracefully because they had the most history with it. They said it looked good, and then I pinged somebody from SIG scheduling for the predicates test, which was verifying, like both of these tests were verifying the kubelet's view of what pods were on the kubelet instead of the control plane's view.
Right. Okay. I may be mixing it up with, there was another one. I mean, I think I'm combining two. There was another one where we split it because they were looking at conditions, but they wanted to look at specific messages and conditions, but they wanted that for an end-to-end test, but we don't do that in conformance tests. So I may be mixing two of them up.
Okay. Sorry if I took you off track, Ippy.
It's all right. There's a UI glitch. If you click on the point and then you reload the page, notice the URL is shareable. You get the right numbers. So there's 157. And then if we click over here, we'll scroll down and see our, and then reload the page. UI glitch is 165.
Okay.
So there's where our 11 done comes from. So if we go back up to our conformant, where was our agenda? Because I wanted to just score and agree. So here was our scoring.
So yes,
We calculated, I think we're going to get to 11. So I think we're actually, this got approved. So we're actually at 0.4 instead of 0.3.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and joint group approve. Approved today at conformance subgroup of SIG Arch.
See, that needs approval is now empty.
This is over in the API Snoop repo.
And we're still not, we haven't adopted all the ways. That's part of the OKRs we missed. And we can, if somebody else, I mean, yeah, I don't have all the automation in place, so it tends to be a bit manual still. And I think the meeting we were gonna, like the end thing discussion, we kind of discussed failure modes up here. And this was the notes we had before. So I think we did well. Any other comments before we give everybody 3 minutes?
I can't think of anything.
All right, then I will go ahead and call it and stop sharing. And if I end the meeting, that's goodbye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you
See you
all.
soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.